Your father's death has nothing to do with us. I don't care about his funeral. I was just about to go on a trip anyway, and you don't need to come back home either."
When I told my husband, Daniel, about my father's death, he hurled these cruel words at me. "How can you say it doesn't matter? That's no way to act. And what's this trip about? Are you seriously planning to skip the funeral?"
We don't need to attend, do we? He's a stranger to us, and we're going to take a trip with Mom and Dad, soak in the spa, and wash away the daily stress.
Behind the sneering Daniel, I could hear the voices of his supportive parents, John and Susan. Since he married me, my father should no longer be a stranger to him, yet how could such treatment be justified? As I was stunned by Daniel's response, the phone seemed to change hands, and I heard Susan's voice.
"Michelle, we had planned this trip a long time ago, and the flight is already booked. It's clear which is the priority between your dad's funeral and our trip. Ha! It's a real family vacation after all."
With that one-sided declaration, Susan hung up the phone. Daniel doesn't care about my family, including me. He only prioritizes his own parents, managing my salary and our finances to suit his convenience. I was foolish to think about a future with him and trust him. While my mind was consumed with these thoughts, I proceeded to prepare for the funeral. My name is Michelle. Before I started elementary school, my mother passed away, and from then on, my father raised me single-handedly. Honestly, I always felt lonely when I was little. I had no siblings, and when my father was at work, I was left alone or with relatives. Seeing my father come home exhausted, I couldn't bring myself to be selfish. My father couldn't make it to school events like Parents' Days, which often left me feeling sad. Still, I understood that he cherished me above all else, and I'm grateful for how he raised me. After graduating from college, I didn't consider moving away for a job. Instead, I worked at a local company, living at home, trying to support my father in turn. Amid this, my father, perhaps concerned about my future, made a suggestion.
"Why don't you try finding a hobby? Don't worry about me. Just enjoy your life."
He must have noticed my struggles to repay his kindness and offered those considerate words. I had often held back on personal desires, never really diving into any hobbies. Taking up my father's suggestion, I started exploring various clubs and classes. Nothing caught my interest at first, but then I got interested in a travel club, which was introduced by a friend of mine. In that travel club, they're doing activities where they visit spas around different places, and I was intrigued, having not traveled much before. I quickly visited the club on a weekend and decided to join that day. And that's where I met my husband, Daniel. We were the same age, from the same hometown, and shared a love for travel, which quickly led to us dating. We enjoyed our travels and, after 3 years of dating, got married. I hadn't thought about marriage until meeting Daniel, but I felt this was someone I could spend my life with. So I had a gut feeling about it, and his proposal moved me so much I nearly collapsed from emotion. My father was happy for us, and I was full of hope for a blissful married life. However, just a few months into our marriage, Daniel started showing his true colors.
"Michelle, isn't it about time you quit the travel club? Why continue after getting married?"
Huh? What does being in the club have to do with being married?
It's obvious. A married woman shouldn't be out playing around, right, Mom?
Daniel began pressuring me to quit the travel club and focus on household chores, and not just that, he would often call his mother, Susan, to back him up and nag me together.
"You should be grateful we let you marry into our family. You're married to Daniel now. You need to act accordingly. No time for playing around."
That's right. If you keep fooling around, we'll have to take some action.
I believed I was balancing work and home well. Ironically, it was Daniel who, despite working the same hours, neither did housework nor reduced his club activities. But neither he nor Susan would admit that, instead blaming me entirely. Frustrated, I didn't follow their demands. I continued with the travel club and planned trips for the next holidays. Then, Daniel took a drastic step.
I told you I'd take some action, right? I'll manage your salary, our savings, everything. No arguments.
What? I'm putting the agreed amount into our account every month. Why do this? I do the shopping for groceries and necessities. How can I manage if you control the finances? I won't even be able to shop properly.
I said no arguing. I'll make sure you can't waste money anymore. No more unnecessary spending.
From then on, Daniel took control of my salary and our finances, giving me just enough to get by. I couldn't even afford lunches with coworkers anymore and had to decline invitations from friends. It was tough having my life turned upside down, but maybe it was a step forward for Daniel to take charge of our savings, considering he hadn't done much before. I convinced myself of this and let Daniel handle our finances. However, this only made Susan more critical of me.
Can't manage your own money. What a letdown of a wife, huh? Aren't you embarrassed to leave it all to your husband?
Her snide remarks were painful to hear. I tried to ignore it, reminding myself that we had decided this together. Time passed, and 3 years later, I was thinking about moving from our rental to buying our own home. I dreamed of raising our future kids in a spacious, bright house, but Daniel never brought up anything about our savings. I couldn't even get a glimpse of our bank book, let alone know how much we had saved. Daniel kept nagging about not wasting money, just like he did 3 years ago. Yet, he never quit the travel club and continued to travel as frequently as before we were married. Moreover, he splurged on taking his parents, John and Susan, on trips and buying them clothes and jewelry, claiming it was filial piety. I tried to discuss this with him several times, but Daniel always dodged the conversation, and we never got to have a real talk. Just when I thought I needed to settle this, John and Susan started living with us. Our place, a small one-bedroom apartment, became cramped and unlivable with 2 more people. With either John or Susan always around, it became harder to talk to Daniel about our savings. Still, I seized any moment I could, like when he was about to leave for work, to confront him. Hey, I didn't know John and Susan were going to live with us. And you even paid for their moving and new furniture. We shouldn't have that much spare cash, right?
It's just being filial, you know. They're getting on in years.
Oh, filial piety, huh? Well, I'd like to do the same for my dad. Can you give me some money then? We must have saved quite a bit by now, right?
Well, maybe. I gotta rush. I'm running late for work.
Daniel, clearly avoiding the topic, hurried off to work. Unable to have a proper discussion, my distrust grew. I continued to live in a fog of unease, accumulating stress. Then one day, while at work, I received a call that my father had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. He had collapsed while mowing the lawn, witnessed by a neighbor who called the ambulance and informed me. I left work early and rushed to his side, only to learn from the nurses that he was undergoing emergency surgery for a subarachnoid hemorrhage. I kept an eye on the progress of the treatment, praying, but despite my hopes, my father passed away. I was numb, unable to process the doctors' and nurses' words as I stared at my father, who never woke up or breathed again. Later, supported by relatives, I found myself preparing for his funeral. I had to pull myself together, I thought, and try to inform Daniel and his parents about my father's death and the funeral arrangements. Despite several calls, neither Daniel nor his parents answered. After leaving a message saying I needed to talk to them, Daniel called back hours later.
Stop calling me so much.
Sorry, but I need to tell you something. My dad passed away, and I was going to talk about the funeral arrangements.
Oh, forget it. Your dad's death has nothing to do with us. Who cares about the funeral? We were just about to go on a trip, and you don't need to come back home either.
How can you say it doesn't matter? What do you mean, a trip? You're not planning on skipping the funeral, are you?
We don't need to attend. He's a stranger to us. We're going on a trip with Mom and Dad, going to spa to wash away the daily stress.
Behind Daniel's mocking laughter, I could hear his parents, John and Susan, agreeing with him. Even though he married me, my father should no longer be a stranger, yet how could he treat us this way? As I was stunned by Daniel's response, the phone was handed over, and I heard Susan's voice.
Michelle, we had this trip planned from before, and the flights are already booked. It's obvious which is the priority between your dad's funeral and our trip. It's a real family vacation after all.
After saying this unilaterally, Susan hung up. Daniel doesn't care about my family, including me. He only prioritizes his own parents, managing my salary and our finances as it suits him. I was foolish to think about a future with him and trust him. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, I proceeded with the funeral preparations. In the end, Daniel and his parents, true to their words, did not show up for my father's funeral. During the funeral, relatives kept asking about Daniel and his parents. I couldn't bring myself to admit they prioritized a family trip, so I evaded the questions. Yet, some seemed to understand the strain in our marriage, looking at me with pity. I pretended not to notice and carried on. Returning home, there was still no sign of Daniel and his parents, and the house was eerily quiet. Alone with my grief, I received a call from Daniel.
Hey, Michelle, I need help. We had an accident on the trip. Can you come here right away?
An accident?
Yeah. Susan drove the rental car into a single-car accident. She broke some bones and has to stay in the hospital here for a while.
According to Daniel, Susan was driving from the hotel to a corner store. It seemed she couldn't handle the curve and crashed into the guardrail. Due to her age and the fractures, she'll be staying in the local hospital until she's well enough to be moved.
Can't leave Mom alone here, so Michelle, come and take care of her. I need to go back for work.
Why me? You're her son, you should be taking care of her.
Come on, she's your family too. Don't be so cold. Hey, you're good at dealing with the police and rental car company, right? Oh, and pay for Susan's hospital bills too. We're broke from the trip.
Why should I do that? And you call me cold? You didn't even attend my father's funeral.
Still holding that against me. Huh? Forget the past. Anyway, Dad and I have a plane to catch, so we need to leave. You'll pass by as we go, so please take care of it.
What a convenient person he is. He claims my father is a stranger, but when it's about his family, I'm not a stranger? Trying to push his troubles onto me and take advantage of the situation, my frustration boiled. Calmly, I told Daniel the truth. Sorry, but I can't cancel my trip plans to take care of someone else. I've already made plans, and I'm prioritizing my own family over strangers.
What? What trip are you talking about?
I was invited by a relative to go on a trip. I'm going to visit the spa my father loved.
Your family's in the hospital, and you're going on a trip. That's insensitive. What are you thinking?
I could say the same to you. In my case, it wasn't about a hospital stay, but, well, that's how it is, so please take care of Susan yourself.
Hey, wait.
I hung up and blocked Daniel's and his parents' numbers. I then went on to enjoy my trip for a few days. Upon returning home, Daniel and his father John came running to the entrance, trying to confront me.
Leaving your mother-in-law alone and just going off to have fun. What a failure of a wife. You'll definitely have to pay for the medical expenses since you didn't look after her.
John yelled, echoing Daniel's anger.
As Daniel says, you let me down, Michelle. So think you can take care of family.
Michelle, you don't understand how hard this has been for us. Susan wasn't the car's primary driver, so she's not covered by insurance, and the bill they've slapped on us is just outrageous.
It's such a huge amount, so I can't afford it. Being an old-timer like me, you understand our situation, right?
I couldn't comprehend what Daniel and John were saying. They seemed to be insisting I should pay Susan's medical and accident bills, but I saw no reason why I should.
If you don't want to be called a failure of a wife, you know what to do, right? Pay for all the medical expenses?
There's no way I'm paying. Why should I? You can think of me as a failure of a wife if you want, but what you've done is far more disgraceful.
How could you say that?
You manage my salary, right? Then pay from there. Consider it severance.
Severance? What are you talking about? I didn't say I'd pay you if we had savings.
What? Are you kidding me?
We've spent it all on a trip. Gave some pocket money to Dad and Mom, too.
I was astounded. Though I had doubted Daniel's money management, I never imagined it would all be gone. Neither John, who's of working age but unemployed, nor Daniel, who worked, had the means to cover such a large amount. It wouldn't be surprising if they were counting on the inheritance I received from my father.
If you don't pay the medical bills, I'll leave you. You can't live without me, right? Think carefully before you speak. You'll want to beg to pay, right?
Can't live without you? You're greatly mistaken.
Don't get cocky with me.
With the inheritance from my father, I can live on my own. Plus, if we divorce, I can manage my salary myself. If you want a divorce, go ahead. I'll gladly sign the papers.
I never said anything about divorce. If you just said you'd pay with your inheritance, all this could be resolved without complications.
Well, I've already prepared for divorce. While you were on your trip, I packed up my things. I have a place to move to and can leave anytime. Realizing I was serious, Daniel suddenly became anxious.
Wait, calm down. Not getting a divorce is better for both of us. You wouldn't want your beloved to be saddled with a lot of debt, right?
That's none of my concern.
Please reconsider. I need your inheritance.
Despite Daniel's pleading for the inheritance, I rejected him. Taking my last belongings, I prepared to leave the house. I heard Daniel's pitiful pleas as I walked away, but I ignored them and continued on. Afterward, I moved to my father's house. I thought about reminiscing while sorting through his belongings, but since Daniel strongly opposed the divorce, I had to hire a lawyer to finalize it. Daniel ended up with a huge debt from Susan's accident and medical expenses, and it seems he and John are now working multiple jobs from dawn to dusk. Susan was discharged from the hospital but reportedly suffers from after effects. Still, with Daniel and John working themselves to the bone because of her, Susan's stuck doing all the household chores, and she's probably living a tough, miserable life. After the divorce, I moved on, relocating for a job transfer and letting go of my family home. Contact with my former in-laws ceased almost entirely. The only time I return to my hometown is for the annual visit to my father's grave. Every time I visit his grave, I observe a moment of silence at the gravesite and report that I am now happy.